Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. Today's lesson is going to be our first lesson where we add functionality to our Educator Store web application. And in particular, today we're going to be incorporating what we learned in our last lesson on reading data from files. We're going to go over two new versions, or we're going to incorporate two new versions of our web application in this lesson, a version 1.0 and a version 1.1, and it's going to make use of what we learned about reading from files in the last lesson. So basically what we've had so far in our baseline version of our web application is we've had all of the information stored about the departments and the items in our store in this file catalog.php. So for example, if we look at catalog.php from version 0.0, our baseline version, you can see that information about each item is contained in this array called item catalog, where we have the name, the price, the description, the file extension, and so forth. And then additionally, we have an array called departments that contains information about each department, containing the department's name and all of the items in that particular department. In this case, they're specified by item ID. Now, basically, what we do is we include this file in all of our scripts. And so, when we have, let's say, for example, we had a larger store with 1,000 items in it, that means we'd be including this file with 1,000 items into every page that we load, and that could be memory that can consume a lot of memory and really slow down our application, and it's not very efficient. Additionally, every time we want to add an item to our store, we actually have to go and update this PHP code, in this case catalog.php, which would typically require a web developer to do. What we can do instead is move this information into text files or data files, which we learned how to read in the last lesson. And what that's going to do is that means that every time a page is loaded, we're not going to load catalog.php anymore. We're only going to read information about an item or a department as it's needed through a function library that we're going to create that's going to read from these new data files that we're creating. And additionally, it's going to allow us to, you could even manually edit these data files so we can add new items to the store easily. And also, as the course progresses, we're going to add an administrative interface that's going to allow us to add items to the store by directly editing, by using a web interface to add items to these data files. And what that means is that, so like now, instead of updating an actual PHP code file, updating that to the web server, we can use a web interface, for example, to update our text file or manually edit it by hand, and we don't need to be a PHP developer to do that. So actually what we've done is we've sort of taken the information out of this catalog.php file and included it into two different data files. The first one is called items.txt, and basically what it is it's a file where each line of the file represents an item in the store and the item's data. So for example, it's a delimited list, and it's delimited using the vertical bar, sometimes known as the pipe, which is typically on the / key on your keyboard. We use that to delimit the different fields. So what we have, for example, is the first field we have for each item is its ID. Then we have a vertical bar and the name of the item. Then we have the cost of the item, the description of the item, and then finally, after this last vertical bar, we have the image extension. So basically what we've done is we've taken all this information, for example, for item 1001 that was in this item catalog array, and condensed it down into this text file, items.txt, and we've done that for each of the different items in the store, 1001 through 1006. Additionally, we've also created a file called departments.txt. What that does is that sort of mimics this departments array that we had created that lists the different departments with their names and the different items contained in the department. Basically the way this file is set up is it's each line represents a department in the store, and it's delimited. The data fields of that department are delimited by the vertical bar. And here we have the first data field is the department ID. Then we have the name of the department. And then the third field is actually another delimited list. In this case, it's a comma delimited string. And what it is it's a comma delimited string of all of the item IDs of the items in a particular department. And so what we've done is, again, we've moved this from a PHP script into a flat text file that we can store on our web server, that we can edit manually if we need to. And then what we're going to do is develop functions that enable us to access information about items and departments from these text files. So we're actually going to be, in this version, we create a new library called filelib.php that contains the functions for retrieving information about the store's items and information about the departments from these data files. So if we actually go and look, in our original version, this is the PHP document or documentation generated for our web application. This is for version 0.0, our baseline version. And as you can see here, we sort of have three categories of functions: config, output, and utility. Well, in our new version, we have a file category as well, and it contains functions that were created in this file called filelib.php. So if we click on file, and what filelib.php is, it has a number of different functions. Let's see if I can blow this up some, for basically getting information about items and departments that's contained in those data files. So for example, we have the getDepartment function. And what that function does is that retrieves information about a department from the store database, in this case, the departments.txt data file. We have the getDepartments function, which retrieves information for all of the departments in our store. Basically, it loads all the information in that departments.txt file. We have the getItem function, which retrieves information about an item from that items.txt file. And then we have the getItems function as well, which retrieves an array of all of the items in the store. It contains information about all the items in the store. And so now in our scripts, when we want to access information about an item, rather than, for example, if we look at item.php, rather than in our code, for example, explicitly referring to item catalog, which was included in config.php to get an item, an information about an item, it's actually going to be turned into a call to this new getItem function where we pass it the item ID. So all of those item catalog references are going to be removed. All of the references to this departments array are going to be removed, because in our new web application we're not going to be including this config.php file, because all that information is now in these text data files. So basically, what we can do is look at the getItems function. See if I can blow this up a little bit. And if we look at the documentation for it, basically getItem says it would, let's go up to getItem, retrieves information about items from the store database. And what it does is it takes an item ID, and what it basically does is it goes through and it opens up that items.txt file. It searches for a line that has that begins with the item ID that it's looking for, and then if it finds that, it goes ahead and it creates an associative array containing all of the information about that particular item. So the code for this example, the first thing it does is, it tests to make sure that it's passed a numeric value for an item ID. If not, it returns false. And then what it does is, in this first if statement, it calls a function called openItemsDataFile, which is basically a function we've created in our function library that is used to open a connection to that items.txt file. And if this is successful, this is going to return true. It's going to basically loop over the different lines in that file, searching for the items, for the particular item ID. If we just have a quick look at openItemsDataFile, this is a function, and the reason we've separated this, basically all it does is calls fopen on our items file, which, by the way, is something that we've defined as a constant in our config.php file. So for example, if we click on items data file, this actually links to the source code for, or the documentation for config.php, and you can see what we've done is actually we've defined a couple of new constants here, one called items data file, which basically states that the items data file is called items.txt and it's in the include directory. We define what's known as the items data separator, which basically we're telling PHP that our items, the different items data fields in that file, are separated by the vertical bar. And then we're also saying, defining the departments data file, which basically says the information about all the departments is stored in departments.txt in our include directory. And then we also define two other data separators. One that says the department's data field. The data fields of the department line in departments.txt are separated by vertical bars, and then another constant that says that the items in a particular department are separated by commas. So if we go back and look at departments.txt, we can see that this vertical bar character is our department data separator, and then this comma here is, I believe we called it department's item ID separator, and that's basically saying that we're separating the IDs in this third field by a comma, and we're going to use these constants in our different functions in file lib.php. So basically, in this open items data file, we open our file. We use the fopen command. We open it for reading, which is going to put the cursor at the file pointer at the beginning of the file. We're going to use our error suppression operator, as we learned about in the last lesson, to suppress any error if there's an error opening the file. If there is a problem, we output an error message. If there isn't a problem, we return a handle to that open file. So back in get item, the first thing we do, or the second thing we do, is we call this open items data file. So we get a file handle to that data file. And then basically what we do is we use a similar scenario to what we went over in the last lecture, which is we loop over this contents of this file, reading one line at a time from the file. We make use of this EOF character to find out when we're at the end of the file. And basically what we do is we read a line from the file using fgets, and we trim any white space off of it. And then using this items data separator character, which if we click on, we saw as the vertical bar. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to explode or take that each line that's in items.txt and place it into an array and separate the contents based on where the vertical bars are. So we're going to have an array that's going to contain the item ID, the name, the price, the description, and the file extension. Basically, then the next thing we do is in our items.txt file, the first data field for a particular item on a line is the item ID. So when we read this line using fgets and we run the explode function on it, the first element in the array that explode function is going to generate is going to be the item ID. So actually what we do is then we test if that first element, which would have index 0, is equal to item ID, to the item ID passed into the function. So basically we're saying, is this current line that we're on, is the item ID of that line equal to the item we're looking for? If it's not, then we're just going to say continue this while loop, looping to the next line. Then, if that turns out to be false, meaning that this condition turns out to be false, meaning that it is the item ID that we're looking for, then what we're going to do is we're going to call this function create item data array. And what that function does is it basically builds an associative array of all the information in that line of the items.txt. So if we click on the link to create items data array, we can see it creates an associative array containing all of the information about an item taken from the data fields in a line in the items data file. And it explains that the associative array that it returns contains the following keys: name, price, description, and image file extension. And basically those keys correspond to the different values in items.txt, the name, the price, the description, and then all the way down at the end, the image file name. So we're essentially creating an array that mimics what we used to create in our item catalog array. So for item 1001, we created an associative array with the keys name, price, description, and image file extension. We're creating that same array, but we're doing it in this new function library. Basically all this item array does is it basically tests to see that there are at least 5 elements in this line, in this array that it was passed, to make sure that it has the 5 elements needed for an item: its ID, its name, its price, its description, and its image file extension. If it's not equal to 5 in length, it returns false. If it is equal to 5, it goes ahead and it creates this item array and associative array and adds the name, price, description, and image file extension to it and returns that associative array back to the calling function, which in this case was our getItem function. So getItem, it opened the data file, it looped over each line of the file looking for an item that had the item ID we were searching for. If it found one, it created this item. It created an item data array that has those, associative array that has the name, price, description, and file extension keys in it. And as long as that function create item array doesn't return false, what we're going to do is then we're going to break out of the loop because we've found the item that we're looking for. We've loaded the file. We've loaded that item's information from the file, and so we've gotten the information we needed. Then we're going to complete this loop of opening, reading, and closing a file by calling the fclose method, which is going to, when we pass it the file handle that we generated up here in open items data file. Output an error message if there's an error closing the file. And then if this item array is not empty, meaning that we were able to find the item in our items.txt and load it with information and load it with that item's information, we return that item array, and if not, we return false. There's also a message down here that says that if we had an error opening the items data file, we return false as well. So this getItem method basically allows us to search through that items.txt file, look for a particular item, and pull out the information that we need. So for example, in our item.php file, one of the things we do at the beginning of this file is, well, first off, if you remember, and if you look at the original 0.0 version of the web app, this item.php file takes one get parameter, and it's an item ID that specifies the item ID we want to load the information for. And so what we do here is now, when we load up the information about the item, we call this new getItem method that's provided in this function library and pass it the current item ID. Whereas in our old version, what we did was the way we loaded the item was by using that item catalog array defined in catalog.php and passing it the key, which is the item's ID. So for example, we'd look up item catalog 1001, we'd pass it the key 1001, and then that would return this array here. Now we're sort of replacing that array lookup with this new function call that's going to load the item's information from the file. And what we've actually done is we've done the same thing for the department. Departments, we've created a method called getDepartment that's going to load department's information from the file. It works very similar to the getItem function. It opens the department's data file. It loops over each line of the file, looking for the department ID of a particular department we're trying to look up. If it finds it, it creates an array of that department's information. Then it closes the file and returns the array containing the department's information or false if it couldn't be found. The one difference here is that if we look at create department data array, what we can see is that this returns an associative array containing a key name and a key items. Name is going to have a value that's a string, which is the name of the department, and items is going to be an index array of all the item IDs of all the items in that department. So if we look at departments.txt, we can see that, for example, for department 1, it has the name apparel, and then it has two items in it, 1001 and 1004. So in this create department array, what we do is we extract from the array that contains all the information on that line, on the line in the file. We extract the name of the department, and then what we do is actually on the third element in that array, which is the comma-separated list of all the items IDs, we run explode on that string using the department's item ID separator, which is the comma that says, give me an array containing all the item IDs of the items in the department. And then basically what we do is we loop over that array and basically add, create an index array containing all of the item IDs of the items in the department, and then we add that array to the department associative array with the key items. So get department makes use of this function to generate its department information, and it works basically the same way as the get item does, except it's operating on the department.txt file versus items.txt file. And as mentioned, we also have a get departments function, which basically is used to go through and read every line of the file. Read every line of the departments.txt file and basically create a giant associative array with the key that's the ID of the department, and then an array that contains all of the department's information. So, for example, formerly in catalog.php, this departments array, this is basically what we're going to get when we call this get departments function now. So this array has been replaced by this get departments function. It's going to create an associative array with keys that are the IDs of a particular department, and then the values associated with those keys are going to be another array that contains information about the department, such as its name and the items in that department. So that's the get departments function. We have the same thing for the get items function, which basically loads loads an associative array of all of the items in the store database, which we use in our viewcart.php script. And what that does is that basically mimics the creation of this item catalog array. It has a key that's the particular item's ID, and then associated with each of those keys is an array containing information about a particular item. And as mentioned, we use that in viewcart.php, because in viewcart.php we load all of the items in the store and then output a table listing links to each of those items. One thing to note to show the use of these in actual code is if we look at header.phtml. Well, in header.phtml, that's what outputs our left-hand navigation bar. And the way it does that is by looping over all of the departments in the store, outputting links to those department pages. Well, in our last version of the web application, we directly accessed this departments array in catalog.php in order to load information about a particular department to output a link to it. Now, if we look at the new version of it, what we've done is we've actually replaced that with a call to this get departments function. So we're no longer accessing that statically defined array in catalog.php. We're calling this get departments method, which is going to be able to read from that data file and see and pull up information about all the different departments that we have in the file. One thing to note also is that in item.php, for example, we make use of this is one example of where we've used the get item method to pull information about an item for display. So for item.php, we want to load the information for a particular item, so we call this get item function. Whereas in the previous version of item.php, we actually loaded it from that static array item catalog. So I'm not going to go over all of the different examples. There's many different spots where these new functions are used throughout this version of the web app, and you can see them on the changelog. But these are just a couple of examples of how these functions that we've created are used throughout the code. One other thing to notice that I didn't mention is we've also created two functions called department exists and item exists, and basically those functions are used to read that data file. For example, items exist, you pass it an item ID and basically asking, does this item exist in the store database? So you pass it the item ID 1001. Items exist function will go ahead, open up items.txt and search through it looking for an item with that particular item ID. If it's found, it returns true. If not, it returns false. Department exist functions in the same way, except it looks through departments.txt for a particular department. So one of the nice things that we can notice about this is if we go to let's go to version 1.0, this new version of the web application, and we load store.php and actually go to view cart, reduce the size a little bit. You can see here that it lists all of the different items in the store, because what actually happens is it's calling this get items function that we've created and loads all of the information about those items and then outputs a table of them. Well, because now we're reading from a file, instead of actually having to go back and maybe updating catalog.php, adding a new entry to this item catalog array that says this is item 1007, this is information, we can simply go and update items.txt and just add a new line to it and create item 1007. Call it, say it's a baseball, $9.99. Use this to throw. And we'll say its image extension has extension JPEG. If we save that, now when we go and reload our shopping cart, we can see that the new item has actually been added to the store. It did it dynamically. It was able to go out and read from that file and add information about that new file. So actually we've added a new item to the store by simply editing that text file rather than going in and messing with PHP code and creating a new entry in that catalog, in the item catalog array, which would get loaded on each page, which would increase the memory needed to load a particular page, which would slow things down. Now, one thing to notice here is that the image doesn't show up, and that's just because I haven't created an image for this item baseball. But also what we do is as you'll see when we develop our admin website, we're actually create a facility to upload an image for a new item, so that when we create a new row in this items.txt file, we'll also upload an image that gets associated with it. But as you can see, we have simply added the item by adding a row to that file. Similarly, we could go to departments.txt and create a new department. Let's create a department called All, and we're going to include all of the items in the store in that department, including the new one. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now if we save that and let's go to our home page, we can see that there's a new department here added. That's All. When we click on All, we can see it lists all of the items in the store. So you can see how now by simply changing this text file, we can add and delete and alter items within our store, and also add and delete departments with relative ease. We're just editing a text file. So in the next version of the web application, we're making some slight alterations to create item data array and create department data array. Basically, those two functions are what we use to build up an associative array of information about an item and about a department. If we look back at the documentation for example, create department data array, we can see that in the documentation for the function, we can say that it returns the department's information in an associative array with the keys name and items, where name is the name of the department, items is an indexed array of all of the items IDs in the array. If you look at create item data array, it returns an associative array with these 4 keys in it. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to update, because an item is kind of like its own object, a department is its own object, and the ID of that item is part of that object. We're going to have these functions return an array that actually contains that item ID or that department ID itself. So if we look at the new version of our documentation and we look at create item data array, for example, we can see that now it actually returns an associative array that also contains the item ID. And basically what we've done is just added a line to this file that adds the item ID, which is at the 0 index position of the array that we create from a particular line in the items.txt file, and just create a key called item ID and set that value equal to it. Similarly, for create department data array, we've added a key to the array we're returning called department ID, and you can see here that to the department array we're returning, we add the key department ID with the department's ID. So now when we, because these functions are used by get department, get departments, get item, and get items, anytime we call these different functions to get information about an item or department, the associative array it's going to return is also going to have information that contains that item's ID. So for example, one of the things that that's going to do is if we look at output item link, in our previous version of output item link, which was one of our output functions that outputs a image and text link to an item's page, we can see that it actually took 2 parameters. One was the ID of the item, and one was an associative array containing the item's name, image file extension, description, price, and so forth. Well, because now when we load an item from this items.txt file, we're creating an array that already has that item ID in it. We don't need to have this parameter anymore, so we can just pass it an item, an associative array that contains all of the item's information. So in the new version of output item link in this new version of the web application, we can see that it only takes one parameter, and it takes parameter item, and what it does is it actually will pull the item ID out of that associative array. And because that all of our item associative arrays are going to be generated by these, for example, the get item function that reads from the database, that reads from our data file, they're going to contain the item ID. And so that basically just puts all that information in one, so now we've eliminated two parameters and put them into one. Basically what we've done is we've updated all of the functions and page functions like output item link and all of the source pages to make use of the fact that these associative arrays returned by get item and get department already contain the item and department IDs. So for example, if we look at item.php from the last version, version 1.0, we can see that when we, in the section where we output information about the item, when we output the item's ID, we reference this current item ID variable, which is the get variable for that script that has the item ID. And then when we output the price and the item's name, we actually use this current item array, which is an associative array generated in the beginning here by get item. But because that item ID is now contained in this array generated by get item, we're going to access it using that array. So in the new version of item.php, you can see that this line that was formerly current item ID is now actually going to access the item ID from the associative array item, from the item associative array that we get back from the get item function. And we've done that, and we've basically, in all the different parts of our web application where we've needed to get an ID, a department ID or an item ID, we now access that, the array, the item or department array directly rather than using these other external variables such as cur item ID. And finally, the other thing that we've done is we've created two new functions called output simple item link and output simple department link. And we've added these to our output lib, or output library. And basically these are just sort of created to clean up some of our code, because we found in a lot of places in the code that we're actually creating simple links to an items page or department page. For example, on the home page of our application, we have links to all of the different departments and links to all of the different items. And if we look at store.php, we can see we've basically, in this new version, 1.0 version, now when we load a department's information, we use the get department item rather than accessing that department's array in catalog.php. But then we call this output function that says create a link to department.php, set the ID equal to 1, and also set the body of that link equal to name. So what we've done now is created a function that's going to output a simple link to a department, which is just, the body of the link is just going to be the department's name, and then the link is going to be to the department's page. Because if you look here, we actually have the similar code here for outputting, for example, department 2. This code, if we copy and paste it up here next to the output link code for department 1, is almost exactly the same except for this 2 here. So anytime we see something that we can reuse, we want to take advantage of that. Now that we have this department object that contains its ID and its name, we can create a function where we can simply pass it a department. So we could call like get department, for example. And this new function will then be able to extract all that information from the array of information returned by get department. So if we actually go and look at our new store.php, we can see that now when we output a department, we have basically, clean this back up. For example, to output the link to department 1, all of this code now simply becomes this code here, one line. And it's a call to this new function, output simple department link, which takes an associative array that contains all the information about an item, including its department ID and its name. We generate that array by calling the get department function, which we created in our last version, 1.0 of the web app. We say get the associative array for department 1. So we're going to go look up department 1 in our file, departments.txt, and we're going to say output a link to that. And if we go and look at the code, for example, for output simple department link, we can see it simply calls that same output link message that we had directly called in store.php before, but now we can simply make a simple function call where we just pass it a department associative array, and it'll go ahead and create this link for us. So now instead of having to load the department, extract the department ID, extract the department name, call this output link function, we can sort of make it cleaner by making a one simple function call. We've also done the same thing with this function output simple item link, which does the same thing for an item. You pass it an item associative array, it extracts the item's ID, extracts the item's name, and creates a simple link for it. So on our store page, you can see that we've also used to output, for example, the links to the item pages. We've called output simple item link. For item 1001, we make a call to output simple item link, and then we pass it the associative array that contains information about item 1001, and we get that information by calling our new function getItem, which is going to load load the information about item 1001 from the items.txt text file. And basically, what these functions do is they make use of the fact that our associative arrays created by create item data array and create department data array now have the department's ID information and an item's ID information as well. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.